Coming up on the latest edition of the NESN Bruins podcast, we preview the Bruins' upcoming first-round Stanley Cup playoff series with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And really, that's about it. So stay tuned for that and enjoy the show. Roll the music! Hey everybody, welcome back into the NESN Bruins podcast. We're back 1 week after last speaking with you. We are on a roll now all of a sudden. I'm NESN.com's Mike Cole, joined as always by NESN.com's Logan Mullen. Makes sense, we both work for NESN.com.
Yeah.
We're both on NESN.com's Bruins podcast.
It's only fitting that we'd be back here. I think it's less than
it
a
all
week
makes sense.
too.
Yeah,
Wasn't
probably.
It like Thursday of last week.
That's
this
true.
Is just an unprecedented rate for us.
'Tis the season though. The playoffs are upon us. The regular season finally over. We are recording this on Tuesday. Today's Tuesday.
Tuesday. Yeah.
The first game is Thursday. The Bruins will take on the Maple Leafs, as everyone knew for the last what felt like 6 months. We're back right where we last left off of these two teams in the playoffs exactly 1 year ago. This is, again, we kind of got into this last week, just the nature of the playoff beast now. And looking ahead, too, if you really want to get crazy, like next year, probably going to be the same thing.
Yeah, it probably will be for like the next 3 years, most likely.
Get used to it. But as we also kind of alluded to last week, very even series. I think that's what we're going to do here. It's kind of just dig into the matchup a little bit more, a little more in depth than we did last week, and kind of break some things down. We'll give our prediction at the end. We might whip around the rest of the league as well to give, as I put it earlier, half-ass predictions of games that we don't even, or series we probably shouldn't be predicting, but that's never stopped anybody.
You haven't
before.
been watching every Sharks game this year?
No, I believe it or not, they tend to play before or after I go to bed. I'm an old man who needs my sleep, and I cannot be devoting time to the San Jose Sharks, believe it or not.
Understandable.
Anyway, Bruins playing the Maple Leafs. As I mentioned, this is, as I also mentioned, a series we are quite familiar with at this point. They met in 2013. That looked a little bit different than it did last year. 7-game series as well last year. Two relatively even-matched teams, as evidenced by the 7-game series a year ago. The Maple Leafs got better. Obviously, when you sign John Tavares, you're getting better. But they've kind of tinkered with some things throughout the course of the season as well. I would say, I think we could start here. Compared to last year, Maple Leafs a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, you can't get John Tavares and not be at least a little bit better.
But I would say, like, maybe this is a hot take, like a little bit of underachievement this year for them.
For sure. And the guys who left were like depth pieces, and now you look at their bottom six, and it's like, oh, they probably could have used Tyler Bozak this year. And it's like, you know, Leo Komarov's another guy that they lost to, isn't exactly a transcendent talent, but I mean, some of the areas where they're lacking are also where departures have been. I
will say though, just looking at the forward line is at least, or it's in terms of name value, it's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it is,
especially the first, second, and third line. And I think with the third line, that might be a little bit more name value than anything else.
A lot of teams would like to have William Nylander on their third line.
Right, exactly, right? So that makes sense. I mean, even Austin Matthews as a second-line center is a pretty impressive feat to be able to roll out there. So that should, you would think, serve them well against a team like the Bruins, who has a good bit of depth. Bruins, compared to last year, I think we talked about this as well last week. Coming into this season, maybe expectations were a little lower than last season. Yeah. They about achieved the same amount of regular season success, especially when you factor in the injuries. But I think this team is a relative push compared to last year.
Yeah. I would venture
the goaltending, I think, makes it kind of evens out the differences up front.
Right. And, the thought I had coming into this, I guess the biggest thing for me is that what would you say is the best line for both teams throughout the entire series? What do you think is the best line? It has to be the Bruins' first line is better than any Leafs combo, whether it's their first or second line. I guess their first is probably better than their second. Well, with Marner and Tavares. But the thing for me is that last year you have to look, at least to a degree, on some of the recent results, right?
Yeah.
The Bruins went 3-1 this year against the Leafs during the regular season. And then last year, that top line was just unstoppable. And for now, it looks like that's what they're going to be rolling with. So even though other forward lines may be pushes, or the Leafs may have the advantage, I mean, the most potent offensive line belongs to the Bruins, and that's worth quite a bit in the postseason.
Yeah, especially going up against that matches up against the Leafs' weakness in terms of the back end not as deep for Toronto this year, or I mean, maybe it's about
not really that great.
Yeah,
honestly.
and I mean, it wasn't great last year. They've had some issues, especially down the stretch that we kind of touched on last week as well. That's going to kind of have to play itself out. Getting Jake Gardiner back should help. I think he played like 25, 26 minutes in the second game back.
Yeah, he was maligned for a while, wasn't he?
Yeah,
right?
but again, it's there's a reason why he returns, he goes right back into the lineup,
right?
And especially if he's going to play 25 minutes a night.
Again, you could have worse third pairing.
Right, I was going to say he's a third pairing guy who's whatever, fine. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Hairs.
Yeah, it's not a great. You don't look at it and say there's that shutdown. Not even pairing. There's not really a shutdown guy there.
Right. Well, and that's the big thing is like they have very offensively minded defensemen, which is great. But when you're dealing with a Pastrnak, Bergeron, Marchand line, like that's going to come and bite you in the keister after a while, where it's like, okay, great, Morgan Riley can put up a ton of points.
Right.
Ron Hainsey's fine enough, but it's like we saw last year the Bruins run circles around this very defense, with the exception of Jake Muzzin, I think is the only change this year. They had Zaitsev last year, if I remember correctly, Gardner and whoever else, Dermott, that's right. So, yeah, I mean, I think that the defense for Toronto is going to be what either pushes them into the second round or kills them, because otherwise pretty much everything else, save for the goaltending, is a push. I mean, Frederik Andersen hasn't been great lately.
Andersen and Rask's numbers are pretty close regular season-wise.
Right.
So.
And Andersen's great, and he had some good games last year, and, you can't – he turned in a couple stinkers, but not all of them can be placed solely on him. But he's been trending downwards lately. I saw not long ago, I think his recent numbers, his last 12 games, he has a 3.66 goals against average and a .889 save percentage, which he's not exactly rolling into the postseason on fire.
Right. Yeah, I think that's. I mean, we're really going this without a whole lot of structure to the.
We admittedly said we were just going to come in here and spitball a little bit.
I think if you were to do a tale of the tape, if you will, I'd give the Bruins I was going to say the advantage, probably a pretty clear advantage because of the Yaroslav Halak insurance policy.
Right.
And Halak played 3 of the 4 games against the Leafs this year. Went 2-1 with a .932 save percentage. I will say, the Bruins won 3 of the 4 games against the Leafs this year. It's hard to, like we said last week, I think the last one was in mid-January. And it's hard to take a ton from those games because both these teams had injuries throughout the course of the year, or contract issues, things like that. So it's hard to really dig in too much. But it's worth noting at least that Halak played well against Toronto. So Cassidy already is not shying away from the fact that if he has to, he will go to Halak.
Yeah.
He mentioned that as recently as Tuesday, I think.
Yeah.
So it's another advantage for the Bruins. And we saw last year Andersen, look terrible at times in the playoffs. Especially,
really
Game
did.
7 was just a tire fire for both goalies.
Right.
But you look at those numbers from last year. 7 games, Andersen allowed 23 goals. He had a sub-900 save percentage. Rask wasn't much better, but if both guys come out and suck, at least the Bruins can turn to Halak and still feel pretty confident.
Right, which is worth something at least. And that you have the history of Halak playing well against the Leafs this year. And I mean, I forget if it's going to be Sparks or Hutchinson that's their backup goalie. It's got to be Sparks, right?
It was, I guess, Hutchinson was at practice.
But I mean, either way, I would take Jarl Halak over whatever options the Maple Leafs have.
Yeah, so that's something as well. It's just, if you look at just the overall, the matchup, this is a classic, the Bruins are a little more defensive-minded. Toronto more offensive-minded. So those are kind of a wash. The special teams are really close, too. The Bruins, I looked it up here. The Bruins' power play was 3rd. Toronto's was 8th. They had the same exact penalty kill percentage. So you got to find those small things where one team has an advantage, and I guess the goaltending would be that for the Bruins if you're kind of really trying to parse that all out.
Well, and I think the home ice advantage has to play into it too. I mean, TD Garden, especially for Game 7s, have not been friendly to the Leafs the last few years.
Although I will say, Mike Babcock would like to have you believe
Babcock
that
downplayed
that the hostile environment is not the fans are not playing.
Right, which is, I mean, I guess true, right?
Which I saw was
technically
actually,
it's true.
I'm stealing this joke from somebody else, but I'm expanding on it. Somebody mentioned, I think it was Matt Porter, the Globe, said, well, does he know that Chris Wagner is from Walpole? Not only that, the Bruins have like a handful of guys who probably grew up Bruins fans. So that's, check and mate Babcock. But yeah, and I think in terms of the change and stuff as well, I think that always kind of plays a role in the playoffs. I think it's even more important in a series like this where, Toronto probably has a slight coaching advantage, but home ice probably negates that because the Bruins will have that second change 4 out of the 7 games if it gets that far. And I just think, kind of going back to what we talked about was the Toronto not having to shut down D pair. Babcock's only advantage when he has second change is going to be getting those top 2 lines out against the Bruins' second or third D pairs.
Right.
It's not like he can sit there and say, all right, here comes the Bergeron line. I have to put out, my version of 2011 Chara and Seidenberg. They don't have that.
Well, and that's when you realize how important either Kevin Miller or John Moore could be.
That's a good. That's a nice transition. The Bruins do have some injuries coming in this series as well.
And so, Kevin Miller, I guess that we haven't gotten a ton of clarity on what exactly he might be able to do this series, but they will see his value when Steven Kampfer is out there. And, Steven Kampfer has been a fine enough, stopgap. He's a decent 7th defenseman, but putting him with Grzelcyk isn't exactly a, combination of shutdown, stay-at-home defenseman. And so you just get a totally different look when Miller's out there. And I mean, I even think John Moore, in terms of what he's able to do with his skating ability and moving the puck and getting it out of the Bruins' defensive end, is, for what he lacks in defensive skill, for the lack of a better term, he's better than Kampfer.
Well, if you want to say that's a wash when it comes to him and Kampfer, when it comes to that shutdown ability, at least Moore has that ability to kind of do other things that negate those inefficiencies. So yeah, it's a good point, because going into this series, it looks like the Bruins will be without Kevin Miller. I mean, it depends who you listen to. Sweeney, downplayed it on Monday, but I also saw Barstool's Rear Admiral say he heard that Miller could be out for the entire playoffs. Yeah. So if that's the case, that's a tough break for the Bruins. But even so, they're starting the series well.
But think about it this way too. I mean, conversely, is that they haven't had Kevin Miller for much of this year either, and they've been fine.
Yeah.
So I guess the question could also become: so say you don't have John Moore available for a while, because presumably he would play over Kampfer or Connor Clifton, but until then, do you give Connor Clifton a look? I mean, he's another one of those guys. I'm sure we'll get into Carson Coleman soon, but one of those young guys where he was exciting to watch during the back end of the season, or that second call-up where he played for a few games. And one day he will be an NHL defenseman. Whether or not that should be right now is a totally different question. But, because of the edge that he plays with and the way he can agitate, I mean, do you give him a look instead of Kampfer?
And I guess it comes down to two, and this is a conversation you have to have if you're the Bruins coaching staff and front office. It's like, do we want that type of guy who plays with that edge, goes up to the line, sometimes maybe gets a little too close to it? Do you want that in a playoff series where everything's ratcheted up and he's in it for the first time? So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, well, and I was reading a story on NHL.com today it was an interview with Nazem Kadri, who of course got suspended for a chunk of the series last year for boarding Tommy Wingels, and he was talking about how he has to reel it back in a little bit. But a guy like that who is going to be an important part, he'll be centering that third line, who's going to be an important part of the Leafs, but the Bruins have shown before they can get under his skin, and in that sense, is it okay to maybe take your chances throwing out an agitator? Because you really don't. It provided Marchand, keeps his antics to a minimum, which he's shown us this year he would. Season, who else do you have that will really kind of stir stuff up? I mean, I guess a Chari, but that's a different type of guy than just a pest.
Yeah, it's something to keep in mind as well. And I guess maybe if you don't have injuries, maybe you do get a little. Maybe you feel a little bit better about putting in. I just lost my train of thought. It's easier to. You can roll the dice a little bit more when you're dealing with guys who aren't as important. Where if something does happen, which is a weird way of looking at it, but it's something that. And again, too, you always have to reassess these things game to game. It's easy to sit here and say, 2 games into it, or before it gets into it, maybe this is, you can put him at some point, and maybe that's something that they want to do if you lose one of those first 2 games, or if you win one of them 7-6, and you're like, right. We need a little more, shutdown back there. Let's give, why am I blanking?
Connor Clifton.
Yes, let's give Clifton a shot. So it's something to keep in mind. It's just it's another card to play over the course of the series.
Bruce Cassidy showed last year he's not afraid to shuffle things. So I mean, whoever they skate in game 1, it's like, so this may be a transition here, but I mean, say they actually scratch David Backes in game 1. That is far from a guarantee he's going to be sidelined for the entire series or the entire postseason.
I mean, I would like to see, it's probably impossible to really do a study on this, but it feels anecdotally like every time a big name veteran or a long-standing veteran gets scratched early in a series, they come back at some point, because unless you go and sweep that series, you're going to run into a point where it's like, well, this is the comfortable thing. We know what we're getting out of this guy. Right. Let's put him back into the lineup, especially when it's a guy like Backes who has a ton of playoff experience.
Right. Well, and that's, I mean, you look back to last year, and Ryan Donato was the guy that, all right, they scratched him for game 1. They put him in for game 2. He got 10 or 11 minutes of ice time, but you really didn't see him much. So we were talking about this before the show, and in the instance of Carson Coleman, who at practice, yesterday, skated on that second line with David Krejci and Jake DeBrusk. Okay, great. Carson Coleman's awesome at hunting pucks. They like his energy. He skates well. But if you're only going to play him for 9 minutes, why? Because he's young, because he's inexperienced, whatever the reason may be, why don't you just go with a guy like David Backes, who, what may be a nice push for the Bruins this year against the Leafs is the physicality, and you'll get that with Backes, and that allows, and putting a guy like that, and I guess Coleman can do the same thing, but Backes plays well right in front of the net offensively, so that allows Krejci and DeBrusk to do other things, wreak havoc elsewhere.
Yeah, and not to be like Joe Sports narrative, but it just from the outside, you would think that Backes, considering he's done it before, would be not more comfortable going to the net and getting his nose dirty there, but at least knows what to expect. Right. It gets ratcheted up a little bit in the playoffs. I mean, it's always going to be tough when you try to go to the front of the net and deal with that, whether it's in December or April, but. It does, the intensity goes up a little bit in the playoffs. So he's a guy who's shown the ability to do that. There's also some versatility now with Backes, weirdly enough, where he's just, I think he sees the writing on the wall too when it comes to his game, and he's going to be willing to give you whatever you need. And maybe it's not as much energy, but do you really need that energy that Coleman's going to bring you? When you can. You've got a fourth line that's really good. You have a pretty good third line, or depending on what you would end up shaking it up.
Yeah,
if you
don't need to start Carson Coleman on the second line to send a message to your team that this is important.
Yeah, you don't need a jump start, especially early in the playoffs. It's like Coleman's the kind of guy that you bring back later in the series, when you need a spark. Right. If you're looking sluggish for some reason.
And I like Coleman's game. I think that he'll be a fine enough NHL player, similarly to Connor Clifton. But it's like in years past when they've done that, where they've got the young guy who's scratched for part of it, it's been Ryan Donato and Tyler Seguin. And what do they have in common? They're scorers. They like to shoot. It's like, not to take anything away from Coleman's game, but it's not like, all right, well, he's a prolific scorer who can just be a little lackadaisical in his own end. Well, it's like, you're basically putting a guy in that's just going to hunt pucks for you.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily the right matchup move when you're going up against a forward group that, when you're trying to match them for production. Like you said, he's not necessarily. That's something he doesn't necessarily bring to the table. So why not go with the veteran guy? It's like, how many Chris Wagners do you need in the in the lineup?
Right. Well, and that was part of the Bruins' issue early in the year when everybody was injured, and you've got Joakim Nordstrom playing on the second line. It's like there are so many guys who are bottom 6 forwards who are playing top 6 minutes or top 6 roles. And so, do you really need to do that in the postseason? And I guess some of what Coleman does well, David Backes, for the most part, can also do. And then you just add in the experience. And again, for me, just to reiterate, it's the usage. It seems like a certainty to me that if David Backes were to play in the role that Carson Coleman will play, then you'll see Backes more than you'll see Coleman.
Yep, that makes sense.
And I'd say it's next to a guarantee that if Coleman plays in game 1, he won't play in game 2. That's a prediction on my part.
Makes sense. Anything else on the lines? I mean, whatever. I think
Heinen should be on the top line. That's my thing.
I guess, like, I get where you're coming from with that, but it's also one of those things too where, and I don't think like Bruce Cassidy coach is scared or anything, but it's just how well this first line operates against the Leafs and the success. I'm just trying to pull it up here real quick. The Bergeron line this season accounted for 7 of the Bruins' 16 goals against Toronto. Yeah. Pastrnak was awesome. 6 goals, 3 assists. So is that something you really want to? Is this the time to really start messing with that?
No, that's a fair point, and not to back down from my take too much, but I know that you shouldn't be mortgaging the future by being like, all right, we're trying to get the best out of Danton Heinen.
Right.
I feel like it adds more overall depth to your forward lines, where David Pastrnak's going to be just as efficient, I feel, on the second line as he would be on the first.
That's fair.
I know that the numbers haven't always backed that up. This is just my trademarked eye test, but I think you add more top to bottom depth by getting Heinen to the top line, where you'll see the best of them. Pastrnak will still be fine enough on the second line, and then you put Coleman or David Backes on the third line, and you still have Charlie Coyle and Marcus Johansson there.
The interesting debate, and really the unwinnable or unprovable debate, then is like, well, what do you have a better chance to win more games with? Like, do you have a better chance of the Pastrnak, Bergeron, Marchand line straight out dominating games and winning you 2 or 3 games of a 7-game series, or do you have a better chance winning a game because you got scoring from all 4 lines, or at least 3 or 4 lines?
Well, and that's something that they may have to see play out, because Dan Heiden's a far more responsible defensive player than Pastrnak is.
That makes sense, yeah. So it's just one of those things where you kind of have to feel it out over the course of a series. I think that's what's one of the more interesting things about hockey. I don't think you get that as much in other sports that have series. I guess baseball will probably be the closest thing.
Yeah.
In basketball, you don't see a ton of lineup turnover, and that's really more of a last resort thing. So that's, again, just one of those games within the games that we'll have to kind of monitor going forward. I think the Sean Kuraly thing, too, is sneaky big for the Bruins.
Yeah. Who does Sean Kuraly go in for?
I don't know. Like, do we know Sean Kuraly's not even using a stick yet?
Right.
So,
well, that's the same thing with John Moore. But
and so, all right, I don't know.
They said after game 1 or game 2 they're considered day to day.
Yeah, I guess. But that's
so ambiguous.
That also seems optimistic,
right?
For like that kind of I don't know.
Well, and so say the Bruins are rolling through a game or 2, and then Kuraly's ready. Like, do you mess that up? Like,
I don't know. That seems like those also are like the types of injuries too. It seems like you don't want to mess with it. It's
right.
Like, if you don't need to have him back, don't rush him back, because it just takes one stick to kind of mess with you. So I don't know.
Yeah,
it's just I like what he brings to the table for them. So I wonder if that's
he's a great player.
An absence they're going to feel early on in the series, especially trying to match Toronto's depth. I don't know, something to keep in mind. I think we've touched on a lot already.
Yeah, I think we have.
I'm not really sure.
Very little structure.
Where else to go
all
with this?
Over the place.
I know. We would have been on a roll if I could just remember Connor Clifton's name. Bruins, the slight favorites, according to Vegas, just something worth mentioning. Series prices, Bruins minus 130, Leafs plus 150, depending on where you're shopping. So this is, I didn't check the entire league, but I would have to imagine this is probably the closest series, which is just a wild consideration when the Bruins are the second best team in the NHL this season. It says a lot about that system. Anything else you want to talk about before we get into our predictions?
No, I think we covered most of it.
All right. I mean, we kind of hinted at this last week too, but I imagine you are maybe leaning Bruins, but in a longer series.
Bruins in 7 for me.
Wow.
Each team goes 1-1 at home over the first 4 games, and then each team wins the remainder of their games at home. That's how I think it'll shake out.
Just like I'm already thinking about like the inherent stress that comes with like a long series. It's just it's crazy to think that we are into the real that's that time of year.
The real stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And that's I think going to be a shame for like if the Bruins. We talked about this last week too. I keep saying that, but expectations coming into this series. If the Bruins lose this series, it's a disappointment, technically speaking. But like, if you lose to the Maple Leafs in 6 or 7 games, it's you lost to one of the best teams in hockey. That being said, I'm going to take the Bruins in 6. I feel a little less confident about it than I did last week. Kind of just looking at it, I saw some advanced number stuff as well that kind of really like this is, I think it was on The Athletic, and they might have been using some of 538's numbers, or maybe it was just the 5, I forget, I should have written this down, but like they had it as like the Leafs having a 50.5% chance of winning the series, and the Bruins like a 49.5% chance, so it's that close. Like it's basically a coin flip, assuming both teams play up to their potential. I think with the Bruins veteran-laden core, I think with just knowing what you're going to get out of that top line and how much trouble that gives Toronto, and the Bruins having the pretty clear goaltending advantage, in my opinion, I think that ends up being the difference. It's tough to go win on the road, but I think they close that game out, and just I think Rask steals one in there somewhere, maybe in that game 6, and kind of exercises some demons.
Am I crazy, or did people think that the Bruins had far more of an advantage in last year's series than they did this year? Like, I don't remember it feeling this close last year leading up to it.
The Bruins,
that could just
the
be
Bruins,
me with my head in the sand.
The Bruins felt like more of a wagon last year.
True.
Although it's weird because it came out of nowhere.
Right, because they had that. Right, because they were bad at the beginning.
They were supposed to be bad.
Then Rask got hot, and they won whatever it was, like 22 games.
Exactly, and I think that kind of erased any early season thoughts. So that's something I think that probably plays a part in that. So you said they were more decisive favorites last year. Yeah, I think that's fair. It's just because I think like the Tavares thing makes a huge deal.
Right,
when it's in your back of your head at least. Something to keep in mind.
Last year wasn't Kadri their second line center?
I think so, yeah.
Bozak. I mean, either way, they're stronger up front now. I mean, obviously, when you get John Tavares. So.
I tell you what, big series for Austin Matthews.
It is. Well, and that's
how poorly he played last year.
We didn't hit on that. And we did a little bit last week, but like, you can't give a super decisive edge up at center at least for the Leafs because of the ghost that Austin Matthews was last year.
Right.
I mean, just there's no demonstrated history there,
which is weird.
But right. I mean, he's proven in the regular season he has the talent. So it's like, was last year an anomaly, or we'll have to find out.
Right, but it's one of those things too. If we sit here, we reconvene in a week and a half, and it's like
Leafs are up 3-9,
or the other way around. The Bruins are up 3-0, and it's like David Krejci is eating his lunch, eating Austin Matthews' lunch, which is another guy we didn't talk about Krejci either. Like huge
career year,
right, big guy,
once led the postseason in scoring.
Yeah, that's my key to the Bruins playoffs is have David Krejci lead the postseason in scoring, because when that happens, they go to the Cup final.
Oh yeah, they'd be tough to beat if that happens again.
All right, let's go through the bracket real quick. We have Tampa Bay and Columbus in the Eastern Conference.
A lot of people are saying Columbus is going to make this tough on the Lightning. I feel like there's too many holes with the Blue Jackets. They snuck in for a team that really shouldn't have snuck in.
A team that was considering selling at the deadline.
Right. Give me Bolts in 5.
That sounds about right. I think Columbus mucks it up just enough to win a game.
I think, and not to get ahead of ourselves, but if the Bruins were to make it to the second round, I think the only way they get past the Lightning is if the Blue Jackets make it a series in the first round and wear down the Lightning.
I don't see that happening. No. They could. They play that style. It's just Tampa Bay is so good. All right, Washington and Carolina.
I think Washington's probably going to dump truck Carolina. I'll take Caps in 5. I know the Hurricanes have been exciting to watch. That top line is pretty good with Aho and Teravainen, but it's still, I don't know. I guess I trust the Caps more in this series.
Caps in 6. Carolina wins 1 at home and gets a fluky win overtime on the road. Just one of those weird bouncing of the puck ones. All right, Islanders and Penguins. A series I really have no interest in.
Yeah,
which is just
I don't trust the Islanders, so I'll take Penguins in 6. I'll take experience over anything. I mean, Barry Trotz has done a great job with the Islanders. Nobody thought they were going to be where they are, but that said, they did kind of fall off towards the end of the year. So they don't seem as much of a wagon as they have been. However, they have the best goaltending tandem in the NHL with Grease and Robin Lehner. So that's not for nothing.
Yeah, I'll take Penguins 6. Talent wins out this time of year. All right. Western Conference, the Nashville Predators and the Dallas Stars.
Again, the Predators are one of those teams where it's like I'd like to be a little bit more skeptical than I am, because I mean, here we were just a few months ago talking about who could the Bruins possibly poach at the trade deadline from the Predators and the Blues.
Yeah.
But both of them have turned it around. Yep. But Predators have been good. Dallas is fine enough. Yippee Tyler Sagan, but I'll take the Predators and leave that in 6.
I'll take the Preds in 4.
Okay.
Sweep,
Wow.
whatever. I gotta have a sweep somewhere. I don't know. Jets Blues.
Jets, another team that fell off a little bit. This is tough. I just, back to the trust thing. I can't trust the Blues after the way that they've played a little bit this year. Connor Hellebuck hasn't been great for the Jets, so give me Jets in 7.
I was gonna say Jets in 6. I think there might be a whole they were supposed to be a legit Stanley Cup contender, and it looked like one at parts of the season.
Right.
I think it's just they're waiting to get to the playoffs, and they kind of turn it back on once they get to the playoffs. So. All right, Calgary and Colorado. Speaking of series I don't care about.
Calgary's been very good this year.
Yeah,
I mean, they're up there with
been
the Bruins and Lightning in terms of great teams. I mean, people just don't follow Calgary Flames hockey as closely as they should.
Guilty.
Avalanche, another one of those teams that snuck in a little bit. But I'll take Flames in 5.
Yeah, same. And Sharks Knights. This is a series I probably won't watch much of because I have a bedtime. But this is a series I wish I could watch a lot of.
Yeah, this is tough because I don't want to pick against the Golden Knights after what they did last year. But another team that got off to a slow start this year is the Golden Knights, and I mean the Sharks just have so much talent. So. On both ends too, so I guess I'll take Sharks in 7.
Finally, some dissension. I'm taking the Knights. I talked about talent earlier. I think that kind of plays out here. You look at especially the top 6 talent that they have is wildly impressive. They have veterans who have been here, before in other stops or last year.
Springfield Falcons alum Jonathan Marchessault.
Exactly. I like that a lot. And Mark Stone is, I think.
Yeah, Mark Stone is a good addition.
Going to be a nice little, not a coming out party, but I think he was hired with one goal in mind, and I think that this is where he's going to shine.
Well, a good time of year for them to have Pacioretty too.
That too. So that's what I'm saying. Is there's a lot of guys on that lineup where you're like, oh yeah, that's right, they have him, and he's been around the block a few times, especially in the playoffs. So, but I think that has the chance to be outside of the Bruins series, the best
Probably
series.
The best. Yeah, I'd venture to agree with that.
I probably won't watch much of it. So. All right, that's fun. Let's get out of here. We've been here a while, and we've talked about hockey. And that's about all we have to do.
I remember walking out of this very studio back in October being like, man, there's no such thing as good hockey talk. And here we are now, getting 35, 40 minutes.
And there's still no such thing as
scintillating
good
NHL playoff
conversation. All right, that's NESN.com, the NESN Bruins podcast. I'm NESN.com's Mike Cole. That's Logan Mullen. We will be back at some point either to pick through the bones or to preview the next round, or maybe even do a mid-series podcast, depending on how things play out.
We've been going at a great rate. I mean,
that's right.
At this point, we'll be back in 2 days.
Yeah, maybe. Who knows? Never say never. All right, we'll be back at some point next week. Until then, enjoy the hockey and have fun.